introducing your thoughts on AI's impact on effectiveness. In 2 minutes, jump in.
You're going to volunteer?
Okay. Okay, no, I'll direct it, then you go, Haydn.
Oh, I volunteered myself, clearly. To start, I suppose, let me just do the quick PR announcement that's sitting in my inbox. So up until a month and a half ago, I was still the lead of Accenture Song in Africa. And a month and a half ago, I moved to Greece. I am now the EMEA growth officer for Accenture Song. And I'm looking after all of the agency new business from out in London. They don't think they're part of Europe, but we still consider them part of Europe. So Droga in Ireland and in London, plus all of the agencies we've acquired, including the King James Group here. So even though that's been a month and a half ago, for the last, say, 2.5 years ago, I'm looking at Charlene because she's been on the journey with us. We've been working with these agencies, and we've been trying to sell South African talent because we're highly qualified, overqualified creatively, but very cheap. So we thought we'd make use of this rand of ours. And that was going very, very well until I'd say about 4 or 5 months ago, when we were no longer the question about kind of low-cost or mid-cost locations. The generative AI conversation came up, and it started to come up in the context of actually efficiency, not effectiveness. So it was very much around cost saving, can you do more? And the irony is that we can do a whole lot more, probably 200, 300, 400% more with less people. But the impact's being felt in this area where the content is the vast plethora of, I was going to use a word I shouldn't use, but stuff that we throw at the internet every day, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pieces of content. And that's where the AI questions are coming in. So we are going to get more efficient, but I also think the opportunity is to become more effective because we can personalize. I think the opportunity for hyper-personalization is now there. We never had it before. I think we can do it now. I guess the only problem is that we're going to do it with less people, and we're going to be doing it with bottom-of-the-pyramid work. I think our creative agencies haven't been impacted that much, and maybe it's early days, but I think that's about forward-thinking work. It's about not using the past. It's about coming up with things that were never done, and large language models don't cope well with that. They cope well with the past and repetition and patterns. So for me, I think we're going to get more effective, but it's going to plateau. And over time, there'll be a pendulum back to creativity, but a much smaller industry, I think.
Thank you, Haydn. And Jared, as a man who's all about forward thinking, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the last thing you said, but everything else I think is right.
I wouldn't have it any other way, Jared.
I'm not sure. I mean, you'd have to define what you mean by effectiveness, I suppose. But I think what AI does right now is it raises the bar on mediocrity. So the mediocre junk is much easier to make, and it's much easier to get out there. That is unfortunately lulling us into a false sense of security because we think that's all it's going to be able to do. But the truth is I always say we're at the Nokia 2110 stage of AI. And it's as hard to imagine what we're going to be able to do with it in the next 10 years as it was to imagine an iPhone in the mid-90s. So I think, I think there are many ways to answer the question about how it can be more effective, how it can make us more effective. I think it depends on what you mean by effectiveness. It's certainly, I'll just, I guess, zone in on one thing, which is optimization and the evolution of content. It is possible now to be, and will imminently be possible in more media, to be far more responsive to data, far more responsive to user behavior and preferences. So in theory, we should be able to generate much more relevant content at a much faster pace. That's, I guess, one definition of effectiveness.
Okay, not dissimilar to the hyper-personalization that Haydn was talking about. So I'm glad that even though you disagree with the last part, you kind of walk in the same road. Tarryn, let's help him to find effectiveness from the form of marketing.
Yeah, I think, if I were to consider myself as like maybe the client voice in the panel, I'm probably going to be a little bit more basic. If I think of effectiveness, I obviously look at every step in what I'm involved in, and I kind of say, well, I've already seen some impact in terms of the effectiveness of the ability to discuss ideas through the use of generative AI in our tissue sessions, with the agency. I've seen much more effectiveness in terms of growing an idea beyond what may have been possible with just multiple persons in the room iterating on an idea, to the point where a campaign concept grows beyond what the originator could have ever imagined it could be, because you're iterating at a much faster pace and building on that. So, effectiveness in the creative process. Massive effectiveness in terms of media targeting. And if we think about the exponential growth in content creation just by the democratization of content creation tools, then you say, okay, well, we need something as equally impactful in terms of scanning this content in order to say, well, what is it that appeals to our audiences and people that are really prone to our products? So, we've needed to get to that point where we can scan the amount of content so that we can really target and find the right content to place our ads in or our content in. So for me, effective, absolutely. The efficient thing goes without saying, but the effectiveness, absolutely. And it's about our way of defining what is effective at every single stage of what we do, not just the end result of a campaign.
I think that's great, and I think from an Effie's perspective, that is exactly what it's about. It's not necessarily about the end results and how did it do, but it's about the journey as well, right? And pulling up all those effective letters along the way. How do you guys do it at Google?
Well, I'm more likely going to speak from the point of view of how I am getting engaged by clients and media agencies, because it's not so much about how we do it.
Okay.
So one of the low-hanging fruits that we see for creative is specifically personalization. And the interesting about personalization is that it's been around before the whole hype around AI. But what's happened parallel is that now we're going into a cookieless world, and personalization as it exists can't be used because of personalization. So what we need to do is use environmental signals, right? Like things like geolocation and all those things. Now, what I'm starting to see is people using AI to, efficiently find solutions for this new world that we're going into. So it's about finding new solutions in a creative world. And that's what creative is about, right? It's about finding new solutions and just having a wide array of those options to choose from. What worries me, though, is a lot of the conversations that I do have with external parties seem to revolve purely around mostly efficiency and less effectiveness. And the efficiency that they're talking about is, how can I make this by cutting down costs of all these other things? But basically, how do I make this by cutting out a whole segment of the industry, which I think is a very lazy approach. But I would love to hear more of the effectiveness side of it, as opposed to constantly harping on about efficiency, which efficiency it does do. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I mean, we come from an industry that is that talks very much around effectiveness, because I guess we answer the client brief that says, "Did it work?" Right? And I think, Haydn, you find yourself in a space where now you're having to talk about not just effectiveness, but efficiencies and how those two worlds collide. We'll come back to that. I want to locate your stance on AI, and especially within the industry and the conversation we're having tonight.
Well, I love AI, and I think just a general comment, we've been engaging with AI systems for much longer than we think as individuals. Siri or Alexa, and they get smarter the more you talk to them. And also Netflix uses one of the early adopters of AI to make personalized recommendations. And it's interesting, even their thumbnails are generated by AI systems. Those thumbnails could select what it believes to be the best image for that film to grab the attention of the particular viewer. The thumbnail on your Netflix homepage might look a little bit different to mine. I like scary movies, so maybe I'll get something that really jumps out at you. But they've recognized that you've got a second to capture the attention and to hold the attention of your consumer, and hopefully to make a conversion and to tie all that in. So I love the use of technology wherever it benefits us people. There's much broader uses of AI that are super interesting. I mean, I read recently of an Oracle data center that's based in England, Reading, in the countryside, that monitors beehives and the behaviors of bees, recognizing that 75% of the crops or agriculture around the world very much depend on insect pollination and bee pollination. And with that AI, understanding how better to look after bees. Now, I know that's completely off topic for advertising, but what I'm trying to say is that technology is unbelievable when we utilize it in the correct way. I think that currently AI was not designed, I would like to think that it wasn't designed to replace people for efficiency. We're going to need more people. We're going to need more skilled people. Companies and ad agencies are going to have to employ people who understand the AI systems that they work on. It's one thing to get the applications. It's another actually to understand how best to utilize it for your business. But now I sound like an advertiser, and I'm not. I'm actually a lawyer. So those are just my thoughts. You asked me for my thoughts, and it's funny how the lawyers always get asked to comment last, because then I think folks know that the bad news, it's better to leave that for last. Let's start with the good stuff. No, I'm just kidding. There's good news and bad news. I guess what I'll talk a little bit about during this dialogue today, particularly with a focus on the ad industry, is questions around generative AI and who owns the intellectual property.
Correct.
So you've got agencies that utilize AI to generate new creative campaigns, to generate creative materials, to design brands, to launch campaigns. But of the materials that are generated, when you sign off to the client, what do you actually hand over? You might think that you own the intellectual property rights in the generated content, maybe you don't. Does the AI system own it? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But we'll talk a little bit about that some more. But the intellectual property concern in who owns the content is one thing, and then there's additional issues. What if you're an agency? There's always going to be a risk of over-reliance on AI. So like I said, do not take the human element out of it. AI is meant for human supervision and management. It's meant to actually be directed to give the business the information that it needs to achieve the best commercial results, to maybe use a predictive analysis and to be able to steer campaigns and to adjust real time depending on consumer feedback. But what if your content that you create with AI for a client, with over-reliance thereon, you actually generate content that might infringe on somebody else's intellectual property rights without you knowing it? All of a sudden, somebody sues you. Who do they come after normally? They come after the client, they come after the ad agency. And then it's not good enough to throw your hands in the air and say, well, we use AI to do it. Because AI is and more often than not, the negative PR associated with a court action before the matter even gets to court can be much more damaging than an actual negative, court finding and fine. So the legislative and the legal space is so unregulated at the moment. It's super interesting to see what's going on, but I'll tell you a bit more about that later on.